The man WHO forgot how to sleep. He sold his penthouse suite at the Meridian Grand for $4.7 million last spring, bought the whole floor below it the same afternoon. Not because he needed the space, because he couldn't sleep and had nothing else to do at 2 a.m. except spend money. Before I go any further, this is a work of fiction. The names, the places, every single detail you're about to hear was invented. But if you've ever sat inside something that cost more than most people earn in a decade and still felt like something was missing, you already know exactly where this story is going. The estate sat on 7 acres of waterfront property in Miami's Star Island, tucked behind a gate that most people in this city had never seen up close. The kind of gate that doesn't need a sign. The kind that communicates everything through what it doesn't say. Inside, 11 bedrooms. A private gym with equipment worth more than most small gyms charge monthly. A garage with 4 vehicles. A midnight blue Bentley Bentayga, a white Rolls-Royce Ghost, a custom-wrapped Mercedes G-Wagon, and a blacked-out Escalade that the security team drove. 2 pools. A home theater with stadium seating. A chef's kitchen with copper pots that hung from the ceiling like ornaments nobody touched. Shaquille O'Neal owned all of it, and most nights he walked through it in the dark just to have somewhere to go. It had been 2 years and 9 months since he'd slept through a full night. He knew the exact because his physician, Dr. Gerald Marsh of the Holbrook Sleep Institute on Brickell, had been tracking it on a chart that now required a second page. 2 years and 9 months of 2:47 a.m. That was the number. Almost every night when his body decided they were done, his eyes would open, his mind would engage, and the house, 7,400 square feet of engineered silence, would press in from all sides. He tried everything money buys at that level. The private sleep clinic in Beverly Hills, $22,000 for a 2-week program. The altitude therapy retreat in Colorado that required an NDA before you could even tour the facility. A Zurich specialist who charged $8,500 per consultation and prescribed a sleep protocol so elaborate it had its own laminated binder. Nothing held. What held was this: walking the house at 3 in the morning. The Bentley keys sitting on the counter, never touched. The Rolls-Royce Ghost in the garage, polished every Tuesday by a man he paid $400 a week, driven approximately once a month. The first-class seats on chartered flights he took to see his kids in Orlando and came back from still awake at altitude, watching the clouds go dark below him. His longtime housekeeper, Beverly, had worked for him going on 12 years. She was 61, from Savannah, Georgia, with a voice like warm gravel and a habit of telling him the truth in a way that didn't feel like truth-telling until about 3 hours later. She found him in the kitchen one morning at 4:15, sitting at the island eating cold shrimp directly from the container with his fingers. "That," she said, "is not a man who has slept." He pointed at her with a shrimp. "I slept." "For how long?" 45 minutes. She made a sound that wasn't a word but communicated more than most full sentences. "I'm going to tell you something," she said, pulling out the stool across from him and sitting down. "I have watched you spend more money on that sleep problem than some people spend on a house, and I'm watching you sit here at 4 in the morning eating shrimp out of a container." She folded her hands on the counter. "You know what you haven't tried? Beverly, I've tried everything. You haven't tried company." She said it simply, like it was obvious. Real company. Not assistants, not trainers, not people who need something from you. She paused. "My niece is coming up from Jacksonville next week. She needs work. She's good at it. I think you should let her stay." He looked at the shrimp container. "She talks a lot," Beverly added. "I don't need noise." "You absolutely need noise," she said. "You just don't know it yet." Zara Williams arrived on a Tuesday morning with 1 rolling suitcase, a tote bag that appeared to contain an entire separate organization system, and a yellow windbreaker with a small paint stain on the left elbow that she'd clearly decided was fine. Beverly met her at the gate. The rest of the household staff, Marcus, the groundskeeper, Patricia, the second housekeeper, Deshawn, the head of security, watched from various positions around the property with the specific interest of people who already knew something was about to change, even if they couldn't say what. Zara stood in the main foyer and looked up at the ceiling, 22 feet, custom coffered plaster, a chandelier that had been imported from a chateau in Provence and installed by a specialist flown in from France. "Aunt Bev," she said, voice low, eyes still on the ceiling. This chandelier, is it original? Beverly didn't look up. From France. Does he know what it cost? He paid for it. Zara exhaled slowly through her nose. Okay. She did not see him until that afternoon. He came through the kitchen on his way to the garage, Bentley keys finally in hand for once. A meeting in Coral Gables at 3, and stopped because there was a person standing at his kitchen island reorganizing the spice rack with the focused attention of someone performing surgery. She looked up. He was 6'7", 295 pounds since retirement, which was still an almost unreasonable amount of person to have in a kitchen. She looked at him the way you look at something unexpected. Not startled, just recalibrating. Hi, she said. Hey, a pause. Her eyes moved to his hands, which were holding a set of Bentley keys. Oh, you're going out? Yeah, I'll finish in here before dinner. Okay. He went to his meeting. He came back. The spice rack was immaculate, organized by cuisine type with small handwritten labels on pieces of tape. He stood in front of it for a moment, looking at it. The chef, Roberto, came in behind him. She did that, Roberto said in the tone of a man who has witnessed a small miracle, without being asked. Also, she found the Malden salt I lost in November. The first week, she was everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Present, efficient, quiet enough to not intrude, audible enough that the house felt occupied. She talked to Beverly in the mornings in the East Wing kitchen. He could hear the sound of it from the second floor. Not the words, just the rhythm. Laughter, occasionally. The sound of two people who knew each other. He noticed at the end of that first week that he'd slept until 5:30 twice. Not through the night, but until 5:30. He didn't say anything to Beverly. Beverly noticed. She didn't say anything either, but she smiled at the counter when his back was turned. The first real conversation happened by accident. He'd asked Beverly to send dinner up to his study. He had documents to review, financial projections on 4 pending investments, none of which were going to review themselves. Beverly sent Zara with the tray. She knocked, set the tray on the corner of the desk, turned to leave. You can sit, he said, before he'd made a conscious decision to say it. She paused, looked at the chair across from his desk, a leather Eames lounge chair that had been positioned there since the interior designer placed it, and which had never been sat in by anyone except him, and once by a business attorney who'd spilled coffee on it. She sat, arranged herself with her feet tucked under her, looked around at the room. You have a lot of trophies, she said. I do. Do you ever look at them? He picked up his fork. Not really. She nodded slowly, like that confirmed something. I think that's normal. My brother has his high school track medals in a box in his closet. He said looking at them makes him feel like he's looking at a different person. How old is your brother? 26. He works at the port of Jacksonville now. She paused. He's the reason I needed this job, actually. He got hurt last year. Nothing life-threatening, but he was out for 8 weeks and we had. She stopped herself. Sorry, you didn't ask about that. I didn't stop you either. She looked at him. A small recalibration again, the same way she'd looked at him in the kitchen that first afternoon. My mom's medical bills, she said. They stacked up while Marcus was out. I was covering what I could from Jacksonville, but the cost of living there isn't. She shook her head. I'm talking too much. You're not. Aunt Bev said I talk too much. Aunt Bev also told me I needed noise, and she's usually right. He set his fork down. What does your mom have? Type 2 diabetes with complications. Nerve damage in both feet. She was doing well last year and then she wasn't. Zara picked at the edge of her sleeve. She's stable now. But the specialist she sees, Dr. Hadley at Coastal Medical in Jacksonville, he's good but he's not cheap. And her insurance has a limit on specialist visits, that is. She made a small gesture with her hand. Aggressively unhelpful. Something in him went still. He'd grown up in Newark, in a house where the heat worked intermittently, and his mother cut corners on groceries every 3rd week when money was tight. He remembered what it felt like to watch someone you loved navigate a system designed to wear you down. He remembered his mother at the kitchen table with bills spread out, doing the math that never quite came out right, her face doing that thing where it was calm on the outside and completely exhausted underneath. He picked his fork back up. He didn't say anything about any of that, but he heard her. She stayed another 40 minutes talking about Jacksonville, about her brother's ambitions to eventually own his own freight logistics company, about the fact that she'd taught herself basic bookkeeping to help him draft a business plan that he hadn't looked at yet because he was, quote, allergic to paperwork. She did an impression of her brother's exact expression when confronted with a spreadsheet that was precise enough to suggest it had been refined through repetition. He laughed, not a polite laugh. Not a social laugh. An actual laugh, the kind that starts somewhere in the chest and arrives without permission. She looked pleased but didn't make a production of it. "You should eat," she said, nodding at his plate. He looked down. His food was cold. She took the tray and left. He sat at his desk and looked at the wall for a while. Then he went to bed. He slept until 6:47. The pattern established itself the way patterns do. Nobody named it. Nobody agreed to it. It simply became true. She brought dinner. She stayed. She talked. He listened and occasionally didn't. He started sleeping in increments that added up to something. Not a full night. Not consistently. But the 2:47 a.m. wake-ups came less often. The hours between them stretched. He started arriving at meetings less depleted. His attorney, Robert Callahan, a former federal prosecutor who'd been handling Shaq's legal work for 7 years, noticed during a call in week 3. "You sound different," Callahan said. "How?" "Like a person who slept. Don't jinx it." Marcus Denton had been Shaq's wealth manager for 6 years. He wore suits from a tailor in the Brickell City Center, whose work started at $200 a jacket. He drove a Porsche Cayenne in slate gray. He had opinions about wine regions that he shared at length when nobody asked. He had also, over the course of 6 years, moved $3.7 million through a series of layered transfers into accounts he controlled, management fee splits that didn't match any agreed documentation, portfolio adjustments that generated commissions on paper and siphoned value in practice. It was not crude. It was the kind of financial manipulation that required sophistication to construct and patience to sustain. It had been very easy for a long time because Shaq had been too exhausted to scrutinize anything closely. The exhaustion was lifting. In the past 2 months, Shaq had started asking questions in their weekly portfolio reviews that required actual answers. He'd requested the original documentation on 3 fee structures that Denton had previously just summarized. He'd asked Callahan to sit in on the next meeting, which Denton had taken as a data point. Then, the housekeeper's niece. Denton had attended one of the informal dinners at the estate. These happened occasionally, a small group, sometimes investors, sometimes just friends. He'd watched Shaq across the table, the way he was present in a way he hadn't been in years. The way he laughed without pausing first. Denton commissioned an investigation. A private firm he'd used before for due diligence, repurposed now for a different kind of research. Investigator found nothing scandalous about Zara Williams. 24 years old, raised in Jacksonville. Community college, associate's degree in business administration. No criminal record, no significant debt beyond student loans. A mother with medical bills and a brother with ambitions. So Denton made something up. The fabricated file was thorough. Prior employers, documented incidents, a pattern of behavior described in the specific institutional language of HR records, which is a language that sounds authoritative even when it's fiction. He had it placed inside a quarterly investment report, positioned where it would open naturally when the report was lifted from the desk. He left the report in Shaq's study on a Thursday afternoon. Zara was dropping off a signed catering agreement. Beverly had asked her to leave it on the desk. On a Thursday afternoon when no one was home, she set the envelope down. The quarterly report was open on the desk. The file was on top. Her name was on the tab. She stood very still. She read it once, read it again, set it down exactly where it had been. She walked out of the study, down the hall, down the stairs, through the kitchen where Beverly was prepping for the weekend. "Aunt Bev," she said, in a voice Beverly recognized immediately because she'd heard it before, the voice of someone keeping something together by force of will. "I'm going to take some air." Beverly set down the knife. "Zara, I just need some air." She sat on the dock behind the estate for 41 minutes. The bay was flat and gray that afternoon. The Bentley Bentayga was visible in the open garage from where she sat, gleaming and immovable. She went upstairs. She packed methodically. Phone charger, her mother's photograph in the small silver frame, her notebook, the medication reminder sheet she kept for her mother's regimen. She left her uniform hanging in the closet. She left the room cleaner than she'd found it. She left a note for Beverly on the kitchen counter. She didn't leave one for him. Shaq got home at 8:47 p.m. He knew before he reached the top of the stairs. The house had a texture when she was in it. Occupied, warm, the way a room feels when someone's been in it recently, like the air has been moved around. That night, the house was the other kind. Beverly was at the kitchen island. She had the note in her hand. She held it out when she heard him come in. He read it. "I think you should know I never asked for anything, and I never would have. I was just glad to be here." He stood in the kitchen without moving. Beverly didn't speak. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, through the kitchen window, the lights of a private yacht moved slowly across the bay. Somebody else's evening, going fine. He went upstairs. At 2:47 a.m., his eyes opened. He lay on his back in a bedroom that had cost $340,000 to design and furnish and looked at the ceiling. The home theater was down the hall. The Rolls-Royce Ghost was in the garage. The first-class some on his standing charter to New York were booked for next Tuesday. All of it present, none of it useful. He got up. He found Beverly's note on the counter. She'd anticipated him, left Zara's Jacksonville address from the employment paperwork underneath a coffee mug. He picked up the Bentley keys, then set them down. He picked up the G-Wagon keys instead, drove himself, something he hadn't done, actually driven, without a security escort, in close to 4 years, north on I-95 toward Jacksonville, arriving at 6:14 a.m. The building was a 3-story walk-up off Beach Boulevard. Her apartment was on the 2nd floor. He stood in the exterior hallway and looked at door number 214 for a moment. He knocked. A long pause, the sound of someone checking the peephole. Then the door opened on its chain. 3 inches, the length of the security hardware. One eye, brown, assessing. "It's early," she said. "I know. You drove yourself here." "Yes, you never drive yourself anywhere." I needed to think. He leaned a shoulder against the doorframe, which was, he was aware, a somewhat absurd posture for a man his size in a residential hallway. "The file on my desk. I didn't put it there. I didn't ask for it. I didn't read it until Beverly told me it existed. The chain didn't move. Someone on my team put it there to create distance between us," he said. "Because I've been paying closer attention to my money lately, and close attention is a problem for someone who's been helping himself to it." He paused. "My attorney has already started pulling the records. There are 6 years of transactions that don't add up. We're going to find all of it." Silence. The chain stayed on. "That file had my name on it," she said. "I know. It said things about me that weren't true. I know that too." "How do you know?" "Because I know you." He said it simply. 4 months of dinners and conversations and falling asleep in my office chair mid-sentence. I know you. He looked at her through the gap. "If I'd believed it, you'd have received a formal separation notice and a severance check. I wouldn't be standing here at 6 in the morning in a residential hallway in Jacksonville." "A beat. You look terrible," she said. "I didn't sleep." "Obviously." A longer pause. Then the chain slid. The door opened. The apartment was small and warm, with bookshelves made from planks and cinder blocks and a lamp with a shade slightly too large for its base. A framed photo of her mother on the windowsill. A whiteboard on the kitchen wall, covered in notes about her brother's freight logistics plan, done in 3 colors of marker. He had to turn sideways through the doorframe. She made coffee. He sat on a couch that was not built for his dimensions and made no comment about it. She sat across from him in an armchair with a blanket pulled around her shoulders and looked at him over her mug. "Tell me about the money," she said. He did, all of it. 6 years of a wealth manager who'd been given trust and had used it the way certain people use trust, as inventory. The portfolio reviews that Shaq had been too exhausted to scrutinize. The moment, 2 months ago, when the fog began to lift and the numbers started not adding up. The way Callahan had been waiting for a reason to look, and the fabricated file had given him everything he needed. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she looked into her mug. "He made me the distraction," she said. "Yes, because you started sleeping again." He paused. "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. "That's almost impressive in how terrible it is." "Almost." She set her mug on the side table. "What happens to him?" Federal investigation. Callahan estimates wire fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, potentially securities violations depending on how the portfolio manipulation is classified. He won't manage money again, and he'll pay back what he took one way or another. She nodded slowly. And your mom's bills, he said. The specialist. Dr. Hadley at Coastal Medical. She looked up. I'd like to set up a medical account, cover whatever the insurance doesn't, as long as she needs. Her expression changed, not in the dramatic way, but in the small way, the way a person's face moves when something they've been carrying without mentioning gets put down for a moment. You don't have to do that, she said. I know I don't. She looked at her hands wrapped around the mug. Outside, the sun was coming up over Beach Boulevard, flat and pink, kind of morning that arrives without fanfare in Florida, just brightness following darkness without ceremony. Okay, she said quietly. He stayed until 9. Beverly called twice. He let it go to voicemail both times. He and Zara talked about her brother's freight plan, which she walked him through on the whiteboard with a dry erase marker, correcting 2 things she'd written previously as she went. He told her about a logistics deal he'd been considering in the Southeast Corridor and how exactly the gaps the deal she was describing were exactly the gaps the deal was built around. She looked at him. The caps. Your brother should call my business development office, he said. I'll tell them to expect it. She sat very still for a moment. You're serious. I'm always serious about logistics. She pointed at him with the marker. Don't do things like that without warning a person. Noted. The federal investigation into Marcus Denton took 11 weeks. Callahan's team, working alongside forensic accountants from a firm Shaq had used for a previous corporate acquisition, reconstructed 6 years of transactions with the specificity of people who enjoy being right. What they found was not subtle when you laid it flat. $3.7 million, moved through 7-layered accounts, extracted via fee structures that had never been agreed to in writing, portfolio adjustments that generated commissions on paper while eroding value in practice, and 1 fabricated personnel file constructed using the letterhead of 2 former employers who confirmed, when contacted, they'd never produced any such document. Denton was at his desk in his Brickell office, the one with the floor-to-ceiling view of Biscayne Bay, the one that cost $14,000 a month when the investigators arrived. He was wearing a charcoal suit from his tailor in Brickell City Center. He had a glass of sparkling water at his right hand. He looked at the investigators with the expression of a man who had told himself for 6 years that this moment would never arrive. He had been wrong about that. The hearing was 4 months later. Shaq was there. And he noticed the thing about people when the performance finally drops. How ordinary they look. How human and bewildered, like a man who built his entire sense of self on never being caught and is now discovering too late that he was always going to be caught. Denton's attorney read a prepared statement. It referenced financial pressure, the corrosive effect of proximity to extreme wealth, a system that had normalized certain behaviors. It wasn't entirely dishonest. Restitution. $3.7 million, plus penalties. Permanent bar from acting as a registered investment advisor. 18 months suspended with 5 years probation and mandatory financial ethics monitoring. Denton stood to address the court at the end, as the procedure allows. He spoke for 2 minutes. He looked at Shaq once, briefly, at the very end. I convinced myself, he said, that you wouldn't notice, that you had so much it didn't matter. He stopped. I was wrong about that. I was wrong about a lot of things. The judge thanked him for his statement. The proceeding moved on. On the drive home, Shaq sat in the back of the Escalade and looked out at the MacArthur Causeway, the water on both sides going silver-green in the afternoon light. Beverly was in the front seat, which she occasionally did when he needed company that wasn't intrusive. You okay? She said, not turning around. Yeah? A pause. The causeway traffic moved slowly. A yacht passed below, heading south, white hull, blue cover on the boom. She moved back in last week, Beverly said. I know. She reorganized the pantry again. I saw. Roberto cried a little. I know, he told me. He watched the water. She found a freight logistics deal for her brother. Mid-size company, Southeast Corridor. He starts the onboarding process next month. Beverly made a sound that communicated both approval and the specific satisfaction of a person who said something would work out and was now watching it work out. She still talks a lot, Shaq said. She does. The house is louder. Beverly smiled, looking straight ahead at the road. I told you. 6 months later. Sunday morning, the back terrace of the Star Island estate, 7:22 a.m., the bay flat and silver in the early light, a pelican working a slow arc over the water, the city behind them just beginning to make noise. 2 mugs on the table, one normal, one comically large, because that's how it was. Zara had her feet up on the railing and was reading something on her tablet, narrating objections to it at low volume. This investment thesis is so confident about commercial real estate. In 2026, I need them to explain what city they're looking at. Jacksonville, he said, not looking up from the journal. Jacksonville does not deserve this level of optimism. She scrolled. Also, who writes an executive summary with bullet points. Bullet points are for people who have given. You lowered the paper. You have bullet points on your brother's business plan. Those are action items, different category. He looked at her for a moment. The yellow windbreaker was draped over the back of her chair. She'd retrieved it at some point, paint stain intact, apparently permanent. The photograph of her mother was visible through the glass door of her room, relocated from Jacksonville, in its silver frame on the windowsill. My mom's doing better, she said, without looking up from the tablet. Dr. Hadley adjusted her medication in August, and it's working better. Her nerve pain's down. Good. She wants to meet you. When? She looked up from the tablet. Just like that? When? Yeah. She studied him for a moment. Thanksgiving. She comes up to my brother's place. You could. She stopped herself. That would be a lot. Thanksgiving's fine. She looked back at the tablet, said nothing for a moment. Then, she's going to talk your ear off. I'm used to that. She's going to ask you every question she's ever had about professional basketball, including defensive strategy from 2001. I have thoughts on that. She set the tablet down. The bay moved below them, slow and indifferent, the way water does when it's been doing this longer than any of the people watching it. You slept last night, she said. Not a question. Until 6:15. She nodded once, like a person confirming data they already had. Good, she said. He picked up his coffee. The morning continued. The pelican made another pass, slow and direct, like it knew exactly where it was going. The city behind them got louder by degrees. Some things cannot be bought with the proceeds from a Bentley sale or a penthouse suite or 6 years of portfolio management fees. They cannot be scheduled into a wellness program or measured on a chart by a specialist in a brickle office building. Some things walk in on a Tuesday morning with a tote bag and a windbreaker with a paint stain, reorganize your spice rack without being asked, and ask a question nobody thought to ask. Why does a man with all of this still feel like something is missing? The answer is not complicated. The answer is the person on the other chair. And the Sunday morning you finally understand that is the morning everything shifts. If this story landed somewhere real for you, if it reminded you that success without peace is just an expensive kind of lonely, or that the people who see you clearly are worth more than anyone with a $6,000 suit and access to your accounts, share this with someone who needs to hear it. We treat people every day based on what they look like, what they drive, what floor of a building they're on. But none of that is who they are. Treat people like they matter, because they do. Every single time.